Today's report is a ridiculously audacious attempt to distill the abject nutbaggery of the YouTube comments feed right down to the purest creme de la creme of nut de la nut concerning the Fremantle Highway on fire and now only smouldering ever so slightly in the North Sea, and what this might mean for the electric utopia coming to the cities near you. Some of these comments are just top shelf, and it guts me that many more did not get in, but I've only got 10, I've only got space for 10, I've only got emotional bandwidth to deal with 10, but let it be the best 10. And rather than just roast the shit out of little Jimmy again, wearing his dunce's cap until the heat death of the universe in the corner of the classroom, I thought we might turn things around and invert the paradigm of roasting the nut so that we could derive something vaguely helpful for all of you who didn't make it onto the show today. So 10 nuts and then a couple of weekend icebreakers, not nuts, but making a couple of really good points at the end, so stick around for that. Here we go. You were talking about lithium batteries. Yes, they burn. Statistics in the US is they are 8 times less likely to burn versus ice cars. These are no opinions, they are actual stats based on number of vehicles. Next point, lithium iron phosphate batteries cannot burn. Progress of technology. Nuff said. Yes, I couldn't agree more. Nuff said. In fact, you could have / should have stopped even earlier. I'd suggest on this issue of lithium iron phosphate batteries cannot burn, progress of technology. As a counterpoint, there is this 2022 report from the International Journal of Electrochemical Science. It's only a respected international scientific journal, I know. The title, Revealing the Thermal Runaway Behaviour of Lithium Iron Phosphate Power Batteries at Different States of Charge and Operating Environment. So, it seems to me a little off base to study something that can't happen, if in fact it can't happen. And why bother anyway if these things are so safe? Because the reason for doing this particular study was to identify the characteristics of thermal runaway in lithium iron phosphate batteries with a view to developing warning systems to prevent exactly this undesirable condition from manifesting itself in places, including roll-on, roll-off ships, for example. I'm just going to quote from it, if that's okay with you. The anode SEI, which means solid electrolyte interphase, which is a coating on the electrode of the battery, right? It's just an internal part of the battery. It's like a chemical barrier, if you like, okay? The SEI film decomposition in the lithium iron phosphate battery is the key point to control the battery thermal runaway. After SEI film decomposition, the anode is no longer protected and the battery thermal runaway becomes irreversible. So there's that. A safety warning should be performed at 80 degrees C, which is the key temperature point of battery SEI film decomposition. So pretty clearly, a whole bunch of highly qualified academics who are quoted in a respected scientific journal have studied the thermal runaway performance of lithium iron phosphate batteries. And this is not an isolated example. And they seem to think that it's a bit fucking dangerous if the temperature gets above 80 degrees C. Next. If you spray water on a burning EV, not only can you be electrocuted, the lithium reacts with the water. Not sure how, but no fire department round here fights EV fires. Lithium, the most misunderstood metal of the 21st century. That's pretty clear. We've got 2 more nutcases on this too, so let us not be bleeding from the ears just yet. There's more to come on this, but in point of fact, most fire brigades do fight EV fires with water, and they live to tell the tale. Obviously, they can only do that if there's access, which frankly there's not much of in, for example, an underground car park with 50 EVs on fire or something, and certainly no access on something as hard to get at as the core of a roll-on, roll-off ship such as the Fremantle Highway. And not only that, you need the access to spray the water on the culprits, but you also need to wear some pretty sophisticated PPE because you're really not going to know if the batteries contain cobalt or not, and that shit is properly dangerous. According to the Fire Protection Research Foundation in America, 2,600 US gallons of water should be enough to do it per car. That's rather a lot of water. Here in Metricville, that's about 10,000 litres of water. So 10 cubic metres of water should be enough to put out one single burning EV in thermal runaway. Obviously, if you can get to it before the battery thermally runs away, and thermal runaways are often caused by fires that are unrelated to the battery, but then heat the battery up sufficiently that it enters the state of thermal runaway, right? So you're going to need roughly a small swimming pool of water per car to fight the fire. And the Fire Protection Research Foundation in America also found that extinguishing such a fire with water posed absolutely no electrocution hazard to the crew. Lithium and water do not mix well. Unfortunately, the ambient level of lithium chemistry dipshittery exemplified here was not an isolated outbreak.
That lithium metal loves water so much it goes bang and gets angry at a much greater rate. Full stop. Dog's dick, dog's dick, dog's dick, because your punctuation.
Dude, or should I say dudes, it's only metallic lithium that reacts violently with water. I know that's in chemistry class, etc. And I know sodium does that as well, like pure metallic sodium, pure metallic lithium, francium, if you can get your hands on it, which I wouldn't recommend. Don't put your hands anywhere near that shit. The lithium locked in molecular compounds inside batteries is a completely different thing. Like, this is the sort of stuff that you should learn at high school in basic chemistry. In a battery, the lithium compounds in a battery are no more likely to explode in water than the sodium fucking chloride that you use to spice up your dinner. Jesus. From these last three chumps on lithium, I'd suggest the big takeaway here for the rest of us is that information, which is everywhere, it's just one click of the mouse away, one freaking Google search, and you get a new piece of information. Unfortunately, information is not the same thing as knowledge. Psychoanalysts prescribe lithium for medication purposes and have for decades. Short of the heat of the fire, EV fire's no more dangerous than LPG fire, which explodes in a massive explosion. Plastics are toxic if burned. Same for tyres. Yes, well, thanks for that, but where to start? I'm pretty sure it's actually psychiatrists who do the prescribing of medication for bona fide mental health conditions. Psychoanalysts, not so much. And I'm pretty sure it's not all that safe to get yourself a solid lithium fucking chuppa chup and chow down on that if you just happen to be feeling a bit manic today. That could end badly. I'm actually pretty sure the therapeutic dose here is lithium carbonate, and we're talking about roughly a bee's dick or 300 milligrams, which is just slightly shy of 1/3 of 1 gram. And that should do the trick if you are feeling, somewhat amped up today. However, if that doesn't work, take 2 of these and come see me in the morning if symptoms persist. John Cadogan for Prime Minister. Yes, well, I suppose hypothetically that could be one way to make Australia less shit. Hashtag not hard in the current climate, of course. There's a few problems though. A, you'd need 1,000 cattle prods to get me to the building with the room in it that had that particular chair and table in it. You've got to be kidding. What a cesspit. What's second prize? B, of course, you don't get to just be PM or run for PM in Australia. You don't get up in the morning and go, I might be PM. I might do it. You don't do that. You have to be the elected leader of the libtards or the labtards. And that would be a living hell in and of itself, would it not? What a sewer to swim through. And if that's the reward, I'd be loudly demanding to know what second prize is when I finally fucking got there. C, I would never be PM of a country that would accept me as Prime Minister. Sorry, I missed a Grouchoholics Anonymous meeting last night. Won't happen again. Ethene ethylene is C2H4 with a double bond between the carbon atoms. Acetylene is C2H2 with a triple bond between the carbon atoms. More energy release. I do detest comments of this nature because they seek to repudiate, apparently by inference, a mistake that was never made. I never said that acetylene gas was ethene. You've got to be kidding. That's the kind of elementary chemistry mistake that a dude like me would not make. Acetylene, which is what I said before and what I maintain it is now because, hey, facts, it's ethine gas, not ethene gas. ENE versus Y on E on the end makes a big difference. The systematic name for acetylene is ethine. It's the Stradivarius of gases. It's like so volatile and dangerous and unpredictable in many ways, but fun. It always reminds me of like ex-wife number 4. You didn't put her in a bottle, of course. You just had to put her in a room with a bottle, and it was going to kick off. Like it was going to be Guy Fawkes on the 4th of July in a hand grenade factory. No lithium carbonate in sight. She's the only one I ever miss. Question: was this fire in any way as damaging as the Exxon Valdez or any of the oil spills fires that occur every year? This is another classic piece of non-logic, and I have to say there's such a special place in my heart for dicks such as this, whose particular brand of, for want of a better expression, argument goes like this. A huge ship costing hundreds of millions of dollars is catastrophically on fire in a hard-to-access place. 1 man is dead, several more are injured, and dozens more are knowingly placing themselves at risk to deal with this catastrophe and manage the salvage operations, etc. It's about a $500 million loss when you think about it purely in economic terms. It's also a borderline environmental catastrophe, and it was so severe because 500 EVs were on board, and that's what made the fire so catastrophic, okay? And there's no way to deal with it other than watching it burn, but that's okay because an oil spill is worse. That's not an argument, dude. I'd suggest that these two propositions are not mutually exclusive because pretty sure they're both bad. Pretty sure both best avoided. There is no climate emergency. CO2 benefits life on Earth. It is not a pollutant, and any warming it's capable of providing is saturated and beneficial. I honestly despair sometimes when I look in the mirror and I see a boomer looking back at me. I'm only just a boomer, but I understand why younger people hate boomers, I really do, because they exemplify this fake narrative of it's okay to burn everything, and hey, if it fucks the future, then the kids will deal with it. It's disgraceful, okay? This fake boomer narrative of CO2 is not just not a problem, it's also good. Like, come on, don't waste my freaking time with this stuff. Why bother telling me? Because on my world, there are facts, right? There are just facts, and often they're very inconvenient, but they still must be respected as facts. And in this case, they must be dealt with. It's not freaking optional, is it? I don't understand why it's important to tell me that there's no climate emergency. It's clearly on us right now, and we need to do something about it urgently. That's a scientific fact. Suck it up, boomer asshole. Like, come on. Instead of telling me, tell the CSIRO, tell the Pentagon, tell NASA, tell NOAA. And when you turn them around, get back to me, dude. But in the intervening time, I'm not going to be sitting here holding my fucking breath.
The US Congressional Budget Office has US transport CO2 at 38%, the highest single source. When you say 8%, are you talking global or local to Australia? Oh, I'd love to know your source on that.
Definitely talking Australia, dude. Now, the source for this is the National Greenhouse Accounts, which is administered by the federal bureaucracy. Okay, so they do these calculations and we're presented with the data, and the data says that cars are a 15th of total emissions, right? And I'd further suggest that transport is not the same thing as light vehicles, not the same thing as just your car. And this is the problem with interpreting data, isn't it? Because the numbers themselves are very specific, and while that's true, the data itself and what it means is a highly nuanced concept, and you really, really need to pay attention if you get the facts straight. Because people go, oh, transport's not the same thing as just light vehicles, is what I'm saying. My claim for the past couple of years since I last reported on this has been that light vehicles are 8% of Australian total greenhouse emissions. And I've just run the numbers again, it's 9% now, okay? Don't shoot me over 1%, that's just an update. Transport, I'd suggest, is also heavy road transport, so it would be trucks and buses. And then there's rail transport, so all of that stuff that we dig up in all of those mines and transport endlessly to the coast to ship it off to wherever, that's done by rail typically, and they're all diesel locomotives burning that. Plus we've got a whole bunch of boating and domestic shipping that comprises transport, and also all domestic flight. Cars are a lower percentage, like when I say cars, I mean light vehicles, are a lower percentage of total emissions here in Australia because we've got so many coal mines and because we rely so heavily on burning coal and gas compared with other properly non-shithole advanced Western democracies. Okay? That's just how this rolls. Now, I just ran the numbers for 2021. 466 million tonnes is our total CO2 equivalent emissions in Australia, of which 160 million is the generation of electricity. So that's slightly more than 1/3. Stationary energy, which is basically shit you burn that doesn't make electricity. It's like for industrial processes. You've got to bake some bread, or you've got to, I don't know, mash up some wheat or some corn or something and then boil it up to make the ethanol to put in E10, and you need to light a fire to do that. That's so-called stationary energy, which is the next biggest thing, 106 million tonnes. And then transport is 89, so roughly 90 out of 466 million. According to the Climate Council of Australia, light vehicles are about half. They say 43 million tonnes of CO2. That's in a PDF you can download today. So 43 out of 466 million tonnes. That's 9%. That's based on 2021 emissions. And it's probably climbed a bit because transport's on the up again. You know, driving all over the shop is on the up again in the aftermath of the pandemic, basically. So, excuse me, I was working on earlier data last time I reported that it was 8%. But it's still the same ballpark, and you'd expect the numbers to evolve over time. And if we manage to wean ourselves off coal and gas, then cars and other light vehicles will be incrementally increasing as a source of greenhouse emissions for the nation in percentage terms, right? If you want to know what the other big emitters are, they're actually agriculture, which is 79%, fugitive emissions. They're quite interesting to me too. They're just like, you know, if Hannibal Lecter jumps over the wire, he's a fugitive. Well, these are the emissions that do the Hannibal Lecter over the wire from a coal mine. So if you've got a big fat coal mine somewhere, big open cut jobby, and you fractured up all of that earth, then what happens is methane and other greenhouse gases like that just seep out of it, and these are so-called fugitive emissions. Now, fugitive emissions are 50 million tonnes. So essentially, we've got more greenhouse gases leaking out of our coal mines than we've got coming out of the tailpipes of all of our light vehicles. And those fugitive emissions are concentrated in a particular fucking spot, and they might conceivably be dealt with in a responsible way far more easily and more cheaply than by transitioning, and I hate that word, to EVs as light vehicles, right? So you've got to think about the reality of the whole emissions picture and wonder why we're not tackling the obvious, far bigger problems first, right? Stationary energy and electricity, they're all bigger than light vehicles, aren't they? And they're all concentrated. So we could potentially, if somebody ever gets capture and storage technology off the ground, we could even maybe use that in those kinds of places, couldn't we? And yet as a society, we seem completely obsessed with this single-minded focus on just moving to EVs. It doesn't make sense to me, speaking as an engineer. I prefer the term Douglas Adams coined for rapid disassembly. Sudden massive existence failure. I use this at work all the time and it annoys the engineers, which is an added bonus. At this point, I thought we'd just pivot now into pre-weekend mode, and instead of just chastising the nut endlessly, however entertaining that might be, we might take pity on the nut because frankly, he's not equipped to defend himself effectively in this arena. And the pre-weekend mindset is if we just change our perspective slightly and knock back a couple of cold ones, oil the old neck, as it were, then things might not be perceived as being quite that bad. I almost did vagina hands for a minute there. I never do that. That'd be like being an actual reporter on TV. I like that one, though. I really, really like it. Sudden massive existence failure, or SMEF. I don't know what happened, mate. 1 minute she was humming along fine, and now it just smeffed itself all over the floor. George Carlin said, "Think how stupid the average human is. Now remember, half of them are dumber than that." So there you go. George Carlin was, of course, a complete comedic genius par excellence and a dead-set legend. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, where have you been all your life? And at the conclusion of this video, you must, this is not optional, the end of this video is nigh, kind of like death, if you're me. At the conclusion of this video, you must crank up the YouTube search engine and type in George Carlin advertising lullaby. It is the most perfectly on point piece of satirical poetry you will ever hear. It's just absolutely brilliant. Do not die before hearing that. It's just genius. So he is quite true, and he had this great capacity to look into the truth of something and extract something that was poignant and absolutely on point at the same time. That was his singular defining skill, I think. He's just a genius. And, it's amazing when you're in the presence of genius. Where does that stuff come from? I've interviewed comedians about, like, what's the formula? And they just go, I just go into a place in my head and funny stuff pops out. They got no idea either. They're completely unhelpful on issues such as that. Anyway, he's completely true. Half of people are dumber than average, and look at how dog shit dumb the average person is. What I would suggest to you, therefore, is always strive, always, to be above average at everything. And that brings me to the, as we would have said as kids, very end. So, as we say in Australia, have a good weekend. Check ya.